Welcome, my friends, to Dawn of the New Earth. My name is Morgue, and I'm an ex-Christian revealing hidden knowledge to create a new world. And today we are continuing to explore Satanism. Specifically, we're taking a look at the satanic idea of life after death as we take a look at some excerpts in the Satanic Bible written by Anton LaVey. Now, we're going to be answering the question, what do Satanists actually believe about life after death? Is it heaven? Is it hell? Is it a reward? Is there punishment? Is there nothing at all? Is it reincarnation? And not only that, but we're going to be comparing and contrasting it to the Nietzschean idea of the hintervelt, or otherworld, as well as exploring the idea of the afterlife and the ego. And of course, seeing how we can learn from all this and have a better life because of it. So that's what we're going to be doing today. It's going to be really good, my friends. We're going to get started right away. But as always, please hit the like button so that we can spread this information around. And if you want to help my channel grow and help me reach more people, then become a member on YouTube or on Patreon. And if you hit the join button right below this video on YouTube, you can see all the different perks that you get. You can get access to all of our members only videos. There's a new one every week. And there's a lot of them. There's probably over 100, probably a couple hundred by now. And you can also get access to our Discord server where we have live study sessions. Anyway, just hit the join button, check out all the different tiers and levels, and it helps out a lot. I appreciate it very much. I want to remind you that my new book has been out for a week and a half. It's out right now. And it is called Cosmogenesis, The Awakening Universe. This is the third book in the Neogenian series, and it describes the evolution of all reality, from the beginning of time and the Big Bang to the end of time, but from the understanding that we are the universe exploring and understanding itself. This is available right now. Like I said, it is the third book in the Neogenian system. If you are unfamiliar with this system, I recommend beginning with the first one, which is Neogenesis, Dawn of the New Mind, and the links to all of those are in the description of this video. And you can also find a link to my Spotify channel as well. You can follow me on Spotify on that link, or just look up Dawn of the New Earth. It's a handy way to listen to some of this stuff. All right, my friends, we are exploring the idea of the afterlife as we continue to discover what LaVeyan Satanists believe and what LaVeyan Satanism is. Now, like I said, I'm an ex-Christian. I'm not a Satanist. I've never been a Satanist. And I actually was first introduced to Nietzschean philosophy before I started studying Satanism. And we're going to be talking a little bit about Nietzschean philosophy. And the reason why that is, if you've seen my other videos, you know why. But it's because I think that there are a lot of similarities between Satanism and Nietzschean philosophy. I personally happen to prefer Nietzschean philosophy, though, and we may be discussing why that is, but you know, that's really neither here nor there. I do think that LaVeyan Satanism is a big step up from mainstream Christianity in general, but we're talking about the afterlife. And so we're going to read a quote by Anton LaVey, who is the author of the Satanic Bible. This is in the section called the Book of Lucifer that lays out the philosophy of Satanism. And so LaVey writes, when an animal is sick or injured, he will fight for his life with every ounce of strength he has. It is this unshakable will to live that if man were not so quote unquote highly evolved, would also give him the fighting spirit he needs to stay alive. So essentially what LaVey is trying to get at here is he's saying, hey, look, if you see an animal that's about to die, or, you know, that's being attacked or whatever, if an animal, specifically LaVey says sick or injured, it's going to fight till its dying breath. It's going to fight to live. And a lot of LaVeyan Satanism is about embracing animalistic urges, animalistic instincts, and human instincts and human urges, because LaVey views humanity as just being another type of animal. And so what LaVey is essentially getting at here is that humans are quote unquote highly evolved. He's being kind of sarcastic about that and saying what this has done is sort of strip them of the will to live because they desire, rather than this life, they look towards an afterlife. And so LaVey continues by saying, it's well known that many people die simply because they give up and just don't care anymore. Man has become lazy he has learned to take the easy way out. So again, LaVey is looking at life as being difficult, but worth it, essentially, worthy of it. And LaVey says death in most religions is touted as a great spiritual awakening, one which is prepared for throughout life. So it's no surprise that LaVeyan Satanism is very much opposed to mainstream religion. It's a very large part of it. It's very antithetical to religion, mainstream religion. And it's very critical of mainstream religion. And what LaVey is saying is that in most religions today, death is considered a positive thing. So in terms of Christianity, when someone dies, they go to heaven. And this is what I was taught, or hell if you don't believe in Jesus, which is crazy, but hey, that's what the belief is. So like I said, I'm an ex-Christian, and it is true that this world is looked at as sinful and evil and dirty, and we're essentially just here to get through it until we get to heaven. And that's very much the vibe that I got growing up as a Christian, that, oh, life is just this temporary thing that's full of sin and being tested. But the goal is really to get to heaven. That's where the goal is. That's where the truth is. That's where your priorities should lie, in heaven, not being of this world. And LaVey is criticizing this and saying that this is a problem. And LaVey refers to it as a spiritual awakening, because it's not just related to Christianity either. In many different religions, death is looked at as something positive, where you are having, like he says, a spiritual awakening, or perhaps it is the path to escaping a cycle of reincarnation, trying to, that's your chance to escape a cycle of reincarnation or reach nirvana. Now, of course, there's many different things you have to do to be able to do that. But essentially, in either case, there's a condemnation of this world, seeing this world as evil. There's something wrong with it. It's temporary, and we need to put our importance in this other world. And so is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Now, I'll be giving you my opinion, and you'll find that my opinion lies somewhere in the middle, in these different extremes that LaVey takes and mainstream religion takes, and we'll be talking about that. But let's unpack this a little more. So LaVey says, but to those who have experienced all the joys life has to offer, there is a great dread attached to dying. This is as it should be. It is this lust for life which will allow the vital person to live on after the inevitable death of his fleshly shell. So what does that exactly mean? So there's a couple things happening here. First, LaVey is saying, those who've experienced the joys of life don't want to die. And that's how it should be. That's what LaVey says. LaVey says that's how it should be. And this desire for life, LaVey says, is that which will allow the vital person to live on after the death of his fleshly shell. So what does that mean, live on after the death? How can you live on after the death of your fleshly shell? Through having a vitality of life. We're going to be exploring what LaVey means by that. But one thing I want to talk about here is that LaVey is essentially saying that the idea of an afterlife, because he says, oh, if you experience the joys of life, then you don't want to die. And he's essentially getting at the idea that if someone finds life to be a horrible experience, then they look to the afterlife as something to comfort them, because, oh, well, this life must suck. I hate this life, but at least I have the afterlife to look towards. This life doesn't really matter. It's the afterlife that I'm working towards. And this is what LaVey is going to criticize. And LaVey says life is the one great indulgence, death the one great abstinence. So remember, Satanism is all about indulgence not abstinence. Indulgence is taking part in things, indulging yourself in things, and abstinence is refraining from something. Usually it's related to intercourse, but it doesn't have to be. Abstinence is a refrain, and an indulgence is taking part of. And Satanism is all about indulgence over abstinence, giving in to your desires rather than refraining from your desires. And so LaVey says life is the ultimate indulgence. Life is the ultimate indulgence. Death is the ultimate abstinence. And LaVey says, to a person who is satisfied with his earthly existence, life is like a party. And no one likes to leave a good party. By the same token, if a person is enjoying himself here on earth, he will not so readily give up this life for the promise of an afterlife about which he knows nothing. So LaVey is making some interesting points here. I agree with some of it. I don't agree with all of it. And let me just explain a bit. So in my view, I adopt the Neogenian view. In the Neogenian view, so basically LaVey is saying that the problem with those who view the world, you know what? Before I give you my view on life after death and how this relates, before we do that, I want to talk a little bit, like I said, we're going to talk about the Nietzschean idea of the hintervelt. Let me talk about that first, because I'll need to reference that in terms of the Neogenian view. So what is that? What is the hintervelt? So hintervelt is a German word, and it just means the other world. The hintervelt means the other world. So Friedrich Nietzsche believed that the idea of a hintervelt or other world or an afterlife or some perfect world that's beyond this one is dangerous, because ultimately it's an illusion, and it's something that people make up to comfort themselves and escape the fact that life is hard. So already you can see a strong correlation between Satanism and Nietzschean ideas. And that's why I do a lot of comparisons, because like I said, growing up as a Christian, I was first exposed to Nietzsche's ideas, like his book, The Antichrist and Beyond Good and Evil, and Thus Spake Zarathustra. And I didn't read Satanism until later, the Satanic Bible. I didn't read the Satanic Bible until later. And then when I read the Satanic Bible, it's just like, oh, wait, this is just a lot like Nietzschean philosophy, except in my opinion, not as good. And if you're a Satanist, I'm not trying to, poop on your parade. This is just my opinion. And I think that a lot of people find value in LaVey Satanism, and I think that's great. But for me personally, there's similarities. However, LaVey Satanism is about embracing human nature and indulging, where Nietzsche is about transcending and overcoming human nature. Not in the sense of like transcending the material world, but overcoming all obstacles, creating yourself into the best possible self you can possibly be, self-actualization. So Nietzsche even said, the one thing that's good about humans is that they are a bridge and not an end or a goal. So Nietzsche looked at humans as being a bridge between the ape and what he called the overman, or the Übermensch, or this superhuman. And so he saw humans as a transitory phase to becoming these superhumans. And this was about creating oneself and self-actualizing to overcome boundaries and limitations. So there's a lot of similarities between Satanism and Nietzschean philosophy. However, personally, I prefer Nietzschean philosophy because I am very much a proponent of creating oneself and actualizing oneself and overcoming obstacles and being the best you can be, and not simply like indulging. There's nothing wrong with indulging in a smart and conscious way. That has a time and its place, but that's not what it's all about. There's more to it than that. But anyway, so you can already see a big similarity here between LaVey's critique of the typical conception of an afterlife and Nietzsche's idea of the hintervelt, where instead of people facing head on the difficulties of life, they dream up a place where everything is perfect, a heaven or nirvana, some place that they're going to find true happiness or true meaning. And though this is comforting for people, Nietzsche saw it as a way of avoiding life. And so he believed that if someone believes in an other world or hintervelt, it stops them from fully living in the present. You get so focused on the idea of some better place that you're going to go to when you die that you forget to appreciate the world that we're actually in right now. And that was very apparent to me growing up as a Christian and, being raised a Christian. That very much, you would, the focus was on God and heaven, not this world here and now. And so you start thinking that this life doesn't really matter. But it doesn't just apply to Christianity. Think about New Age systems and Eastern spirituality and mysticism, where it's about, escaping the cycle of incarnation, or transcending the material realm, or ascending to, a new plane, or whatever. So it's not just, it's this idea that in general, that there's this other perfect world or other higher world, and that this life doesn't really matter. That it's just something that we need to get through until we reach the real life in the next world. And so Nietzsche thought that this was a huge problem and a big mistake. And so the reason why he believed this is because, like I said, if you believe in this other world, if you believe this hintervelt, you might start ignoring what's right in front of you, the here and now. And this is completely different from, you'll notice that, for example, like in the Gospel of Thomas, which is one of my favorite Gnostic Gospels, the Secret Gospel of John and the Gospel of Thomas are two of my favorites. They're very different from each other, very, very different. But the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus says, the kingdom of heaven is not within you, or no, I'm sorry, it's not around you, it's within you. Scrap that. What he said was, the kingdom of heaven is not some place you can point to. It's not some place you go to. It's not in the sky. It's not in the sea. He said it's within you and all around you. The kingdom of heaven is within you and all around you. It's not in the sky. It's not in the sea. It's not a place you can point to. It's within you and all around you. Meaning it's a state of consciousness and right here and right now. So this is the proponent. I'm a proponent of this view, and I'll give you a little more info on that in a minute. But Nietzsche is basically saying, hey, whether you're thinking about heaven or some other kind of metaphysical existence, if you're believing that life is going to be better in some other place, you're putting off this life. You're missing out on the beauty of what's going on around you right now. So instead of waiting for some perfect world, Nietzsche says that we should focus on making the best of this life and to accept this life, even though it's hard and difficult and messy and a struggle, but it's also full of joy and wonder and amazing moments. And so by letting go of the idea of an other world or a hintervelt, even though it might be like comforting to some people, when we let go of that idea, we can start to live right here more fully and present and appreciate the life that we have. So Nietzsche was basically saying, hey, stop waiting for a perfect world. That's an illusion. Start living in this one and accept all the good parts and all the bad parts and try and find happiness, meaning, and purpose right here in the world we live in, instead of, believing in some other perfect realm. So it's about creating the best life for ourselves right here and right now. So you can see the similarity between LaVey's ideas and Nietzsche's ideas. Very, very similar in this regard. Now, like I said, I want to give you my perspective. And so my perspective is sort of, it sits in between these ideas. The idea of a hintervelt and the idea of living for right here and right now. So the issue is it in the system that I adhere to, in the Neogenian system, there is an other world. There is a hintervelt. But this world that we're living in right now is not less important than the immaterial reality, the mental reality, the spiritual reality. So essentially, long story short, we are all souls or mathematical beings of frequencies that exist in this world, in this domain, to evolve, experience, learn, and grow. And so this world is basically the way for us to experience each other in diversity and create and learn how to create experiences, because we're basically like gods in training. So we're learning how to work together and create experiences together. And so if we're so focused on escape, we won't. Imagine if everyone who was focused on heaven and nirvana and all this, imagine if everyone was, instead of focused on that, was focused on creating a better world here and now. And so this is what kind of ties into what LaVey said, because a lot of people are like, oh, the world sucks. A lot of people tell me that, oh, I don't want to reincarnate again. Earth is terrible. I never want to reincarnate. I just want to escape. This place is horrible. And the reason why people think that is because we have a really trashy experience here on Earth. If we had an amazing experience on Earth, if we were creating art together and learning and growing and having beautiful experiences and self-actualizing and really thriving and living life and in a wonderful way, people wouldn't be like, oh man, I never want to incarnate back on Earth again. They'd be like, sign me up. I want to do it again. Like, this is great. This is fantastic. It's only because we have a shitty experience that a lot of people don't want to return. And so we have to invent, ideas of this other place that we're going to get to. Now, there is another place that we can get to, but this other place that we're going to get to isn't about, oh, you just die and go to heaven. This is part of the process. It's like, this is the training ground for us to eventually get to the point where we have evolved to the capacity of no longer requiring the physical world, but we have to go through these cycles of incarnations to get there. Just like you can't go from kindergarten to getting a PhD. You have to go to all the steps in between. So you can't just incarnate on Earth once and then expect to ascend. No, there's a lot of learning and understanding and growth that needs to go on. And part of that is not only learning how to grow as individuals, but learning how to grow as a collective. People don't really realize that, never really think about that, is that part of this training or growth on Earth isn't just about the individual. It's about learning how to work together with others. So in other words, it entails creating a strong, conscious, global society, what we call a teleocratic planetary civilization. And so this is about maximizing the quality of life for everyone. And so it's only until we do that that we'll truly be able to reach the next phase of existence, but you can't skip steps like that. And so ironically, those who are trying to ignore this life as much as possible are just prolonging their experience here. But this is really our domain. This is our world. This is why Jesus says in the Gospel of Thomas, the kingdom of heaven is within you and all around you, because it's a state of mind and it's our kingdom. This is our world. It's literally generated through our frequency components. And so it's our world. We just need to come together as a collective to actualize that world here and now and create a better experience. And that's why LaVey says, life is like a party and no one wants to leave a good party. But the problem is this party sucks. It's a terrible party. They're playing shitty music. There's a bunch of assholes, ganging up and beating people up and stealing their money. And yeah, it's not a good time. It's a horrible party. It's a party you want to leave right away. That's the problem. So LaVey has a good point, but the only problem is that this is a shitty party. So to use that metaphor, we need to make a much better party. We need to throw a better party. Now, of course, that's kind of a silly metaphor, but you get the idea, is that our goal here is to create a better world, to create a new world, to create a new earth, and to create a new self, new world, new earth. And through all this, we'll eventually be able to transcend to a new domain, the immaterial domain, but we can't skip. This is part of it. And so LaVey's idea is basically, hey, the afterlife in terms of heaven, etc., that's not real. You should be enjoying this life. And Nietzsche's ideas are similar. He's like, The hintervelt, the other world, is an illusion. You should focus on this life and use it to create yourself. And so my position, like I said, is somewhere in between, where the hintervelt, the other world, is real. It is very, very real. But the goal is not to immediately dismiss this domain to get there like some kind of heaven, but rather to use our time here to create a new self and create a new earth such that we're improving reality and improving existence. That's what we're gods in training, and we're exercising our creative and cooperative abilities right here and right now. That's why, like I say before, we are the second coming of Christ in terms of revealing a new consciousness to humanity and creating that new collective right here and right now. But anyway, I want to continue a little bit with exploring this satanic idea of life after death. And so we have a little more to get to. Okay. I went on a bit of a rant here. We have a lot more to talk about. Let me see if I can fit this in. So LeVay says the Eastern mystical belief teaches humans to discipline themselves against any conscious will for success, so they might dissolve into a universal cosmic awareness, anything to avoid good, healthy self-satisfaction or honest pride in earthly accomplishments. So he's basically like criticizing the idea of detachment and pride in earthly pleasures and criticizing the idea of dissolving into a universal cosmic awareness. So, yeah, I mean, I agree with this. We don't dissolve into a universal cosmic awareness. We are each nodes that form a universal cosmic awareness. So our self persists within that system. We are both one and many. Reality is one and many at the same time. The absolute, God, what we are, is one and many. It is one network mind formed by many individual selves or nodes or zetas or eternal minds. And so LeVay says belief in reincarnation provides a beautiful fantasy world. So I don't agree with this. I believe that reincarnation is true and that it's part of the cycle of learning, progressing, and growing. It's like every life, every iteration is like new training data for the soul as an evolving mathematical system. And all right, so here's an interesting part. So LeVay says the Satanist believes in complete gratification of his ego. Satanism, in fact, is the only religion which advocates the intensification or encouragement of the ego. So we're going to talk about that in a moment, but I want to read a few more quotes by him, but that's important, the ego aspect. So religionists have kept their followers in line by suppressing their egos, by making their followers feel inferior. The awesomeness of their God is ensured. So basically saying, you're nothing, you're dirty, you're worthless, you're sinful. God is superior. You are suppressing the ego and thereby amplifying the power of God in comparison, in contrast. Satanism encourages its members to develop a good, strong ego because it gives them the self-respect necessary for a vital existence in this life. If a person has been vital throughout his life and has fought to the end for his earthly existence, it is this ego which will refuse to die even after the expiration of the flesh which housed it. Okay, so wait, what does that mean? So LeVay is talking about how important in Satanism it is to develop and strengthen the ego. And LeVay is saying if one does that, this will persist even after the body dies. What does that mean? Well, we're going to explore what that means. We'll be answering what that means. But real quick before we do, I want to talk a little bit about the ego, because this is often misunderstood. And it's not quite clear in the way that LeVay is using the word ego. He's using it in a little bit of a vague way. I'm not exactly sure how, because there's a colloquial way of using ego, and then there's a more rigorous way of talking about the ego. The reason why I want to discuss it is because this is a huge problem. He talks about religion suppressing the ego to amplify God, but you see it a lot in Eastern religions, as well as a lot of New Age teachings these days. Mystical New Age gurus, whatever, who are like, oh, you need to destroy the ego. You need to eliminate the ego. You need to suppress the ego. You need to, it's usually about getting rid of the ego. Now, this is a huge problem. The ego is not your enemy. What the ego is, if we're taking a Jungian interpretation of the ego is the center of your field of consciousness. If you did not have an ego, you would not be able to be self-aware. You would be completely run by unconscious instincts. You would be like an animal. The ego is what develops to allow for one to self-reflect and have self-awareness. So the ego is not your enemy, and it is not something that you want to destroy. However, it is not what you are. You are more than the ego. You are your higher self. You can think of the ego as being like in service to your higher self, or the servant of your higher self, or the higher self in miniature. It is an aspect of you. It is not the complete and totality of you. It is the center of your field of consciousness. And so, again, taking sort of a middle ground here, it's not about saying that the ego is the true you. You don't want to think that the ego is the true you, but you don't want to destroy the ego either. And it's important. I'm going to just read this is a couple of excerpts from one of my books that hasn't come out yet, but it talks about the ego. And I just want to read some parts from it real quick, because I think that this is a very critical thing to understand, because a lot of people get this wrong. Okay. So your sense of self, commonly referred to as the I, is the ego. Okay. So it's crucial to distinguish the concept of the ego from its colloquial use, which is usually negative. So it's usually associated with things like selfishness or narcissism. That's not what we mean by ego here. Ego, right? So in everyday use, people usually refer to the ego as someone who's very boastful or self-centered. That's not what we mean by ego. In the realm of psychology and personal development, ego isn't about self-obsession or arrogance. It's your center of field of consciousness. It's your self-awareness. It's the aspect of your psyche that allows you to recognize yourself as an independent thinking and feeling entity. So, why this is important is because this act of self-reflection is what allows you to understand your motivations, desires, and fears more clearly, and to recognize your strengths and weaknesses and your patterns of behavior and how you interact with the world. So the ego is incredibly important. Developing a strong ego is incredibly important. Now, remember, we don't want to identify with the ego. We don't want to think the ego is what we are, but we don't want to destroy it or weaken it. And there's nothing wrong with temporarily bypassing it, such as during an altered state of consciousness. We can temporarily bypass the ego, but we don't want to eliminate it or weaken it in our everyday life because it's critical. So here are some things that the ego allows us to do. It allows us the power of decision making. So when you're faced with a fork in the road, it's the ego that analyzes the available data and decides whether to go left or right. It allows for planning and reflection. It allows you to project your sense of self across time. In other words, planning for the future by imagining yourself, your I, in future scenarios, and also reflecting on the past, putting your I in previous experiences. And it allows for empathy and sympathy. And this is critical because, people don't realize how important the ego is. And actually it leads to, rather than a healthy ego, rather than leading to narcissism and self-centeredness, that can happen if you identify with it. But if you develop a healthy, strong ego, it leads to empathy and sympathy. That's what it allows for, because it allows you to place your sense of I or self in someone else's shoes, in someone else's perspective, and allows you to understand and share the feelings and experiences for others So a healthy ego is actually extremely critical and foundational for building relationships, social understanding, and emotional intelligence. Okay, so ego is very important. You know, and this is what allows for self-reflection. This is what allows for self-analysis. And so not only is it good to have an ego, it's necessary. You wouldn't be self-aware if you wouldn't, but having a strong ego is important. So a lot of New Agers and mystics and gurus teach that you should destroy the ego. This is one of the worst things you can do if you want to raise your consciousness and actualize your higher self. And these teachings usually stem from a misunderstanding of what the ego truly is. And so a strong ego versus a weak ego can lead to can lead to mental health issues. For example, weak ego, if you have a weak ego, it can lead to poor impulse control. You can struggle to control your impulses, acting recklessly, making decisions without properly thinking about the consequences, because you don't have that sense of I to project into future scenarios or etc. This can lead to harm. It can lead to difficulty handling stress. When you have a weak ego, you can become overwhelmed, have a lot of anxiety, a distorted self-perception. A weak ego can lead to either low self-esteem or an inflated sense of self, because you don't have a proper view of yourself. So you might feel negative or inadequate or doubt yourself. But it can also lead to people who overestimate themselves. They think, oh, they're amazing, and have an unrealistic view of themselves. So they think that they're all super smart and leading to overconfidence because they don't have a realistic understanding of themselves. And it can also lead to a dependency on others. Dependency is a sign of a weak ego, because you're looking to others for validation, support, and decision-making instead of yourself. And you see this a lot in terms of like religion. A lot of times this can lead to a weak ego, because you have individuals looking to God or the church or others for validation, decision-making, etc. Now, the opposite, if you have a strong ego, this leads to good impulse control. You can make thoughtful decisions. You can contemplate your decisions better, resist urges better, consider long-term consequences. You can have a resilience to stress. You can remain calm and composed and have this adaptability. You have a healthy self-perception, and you have a better idea and realistic sense of yourself. You can acknowledge both your strengths and weaknesses. And you can have independence and self-reliance, where you're capable of making your own decisions and feeling secure in your autonomy, where you don't rely heavily on others for your validation, for validation. And so you can see that you don't want to destroy the ego. You want to have a strong, healthy ego. You don't want to weaken the ego, but you don't want to identify with the ego, because the ego is not who you really are. You are more than that. It's an aspect of yourself as the center of your field of consciousness. So, and there's nothing wrong with temporarily bypassing the ego, like I said, through altered states of consciousness. But in your everyday life, you want a strong, healthy ego. And what is the ego then? Like I said before, I'll just do a quick recap. The ego can be described as the servant of your higher self, the true you. It represents and serves the higher self, and it's a means through which your higher self can express and realize itself. So, you can think of it as sort of like the ego is like a model or a piece that you're moving on a game board. If you're playing a game board, it's the piece that you're moving. Now, you're not the model yourself, but it's a representation of you within the game. It's a figure that you can reflect on, manipulate, and utilize within the rules of the game and interacting in the game of life. So your ego is essentially how your higher self interacts in the game of life. Avatar, body, and ego is what allows you to interact in the game of life. Avatar is what allows you to navigate physical reality. Ego is what allows you to navigate consciousness. And ego coupled with persona is what allows you to engage in the social world. And that's getting a little further, but the persona is the mask that the ego wears in order to interact in social situations. So these are all important. None of these things are you, You are not the ego. You are not your persona. You are not your avatar, your body, but these are the aspects of your true self, your higher self, that allows you to interact in the game of life. You don't want to get rid of your game piece. You're not going to be able to play the game very well without it, but you don't want to identify with it either. You don't want to think that it's a real, that's the real you. It's not the real you. It's an aspect of you. All right. So that is, and by the way, that will be in my 5th book, which is not out yet, where we talk about these structures of the mind and how to use them for self-actualization. But what does LaVey say or mean when he says that if a person has been vital throughout his life and has fought to the end for his earthly existence, it is this ego which will refuse to die even after the expiration of the flesh which housed it? So what does this mean? Because LaVeyan Satanism is in general atheistic and materialist, meaning it does not believe in general a spiritual domain or a God or an afterlife. So what does LaVey mean by the ego will persist? Well, essentially, this is metaphorical for, let me read my notes here. It's metaphorical for leaving a legacy behind. Basically, if you achieve a form of immortality through people's memories. Like if you make a big impact on the world, then you can persist through the memory of your loved ones, your friends, your family, or if you make history, the history books, etc. So in terms of LaVeyan Satanism, there is no life after death in terms of like a heaven or a nirvana or a spiritual existence. Instead, LaVeyan Satanism places all of its emphasis on the right here and right now and indulgence and the ego. And that if one lives a powerful and strong life, you can achieve a metaphorical immortality through memory and legacy. That is the LaVeyan interpretation. And like I said, that's not my interpretation. My interpretation is different, that there very much is a spiritual or immaterial or frequency aspect to reality. But this world, we should still be focused on it because this is part of the process of our evolution and growth and development, and we need to throw a better party. Of course, there's more to it than that. I'm just using the terms of, LaVeyan Satanism. We need to do more than throw a party. We want to create a teleocratic planetary civilization, which is about maximizing the quality of life for everyone, which means making sure that everyone has access to healthcare and education and money and strong social bonds. And there so many aspects to reality that we need to transform in order to make sure that we are maximizing the quality of life for everyone, not just a few people at the top, but everybody. And that's what we need to do. And that's what our goal is here, at least, those who are involved in what we do on this channel. But as far as LaVeyan Satanism goes, that isn't the interpretation. And what I want to know from you guys is I want to know what you think. I want you to tell me in the comments, what do you believe about life after death? Do you take a LaVeyan approach where you don't really exist? There is no real life after death. You just don't exist anymore. And it's about completely indulging in this life. Or do you believe that there is a heaven or something like that we should be striving to get to? Or do you take the more middle of the road position, which is that this world is important and these lives that we have here are important and we should be focused on building a better world, and that the transcendent domain is a place that we will eventually evolve to, or something completely different? In other words, just let me know. Tell me your thoughts in the comments. I always like to hear what you guys have to say. There's a whole playlist on Satanism. Go check it out if you want to know more about it. Check out my channel. Check out my work. Become a member if you want to help my channel grow. You can check out all the different perks you get, like members only videos. And like I said, my new book is out right now. If you don't know where to begin, start with book number 1, Neogenesis, Dawn of the New Mind. And if you like some of the stuff we were talking about today with regard to what I say that I support as far as the Neogenian system goes, start with this book. It'll be a great introduction, and the link is in the description of this video. Thank you all so much. I want to give you a big shout out to everyone who supports, especially Renaissance Fairy, Cassidy, Angela, DB, Nusalina, Christopher, Eon, Vanessa, and Dallas. Thank you very much.